All right. Thank you for joining us for Real Results, Real Fast, how distributed tech is fueling a sustainable and creative revolution in M&E. I'm John Gleeson. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Storj. We're a distributed cloud object storage, GPU, and file storage provider in the M&E industry. I'm joined with Eric Tang from LivePeer and Jordan Maltby from Shadow Magic Studio and Beam Transfer. Before we get started, maybe I can ask gentlemen you to give a quick intro of yourselves and your projects and talk a little bit about what you do. Eric, you want to start us off?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Tang. I'm the co-founder and CTO at LivePeer. LivePeer started about 8 years ago, and we're building a decentralized and distributed video streaming and video processing infrastructure that's an alternative to the cloud. Now, that's a mouthful, but what that really means is we partner with data center operators around the world that creates a really cost-effective and scalable thing that looks like the cloud, but it's very performant, and it's about 80% more cost-effective than traditional cloud solutions.
Hi, I'm Jordan Maltby. I'm the CEO of both Shadow Magic Studios and Beam Transfer. Shadow Magic Studios as a digital lab services company that uses remote rigs, remote operators, and cloud technology instead of the traditional brick and mortar. We also have a full post-management company, which is kind of like a post-supervisor as a service. And then we also have a full script-to-screen production company that when these, 2-3 branches come together, have a sort of a holistic approach to independent film production. And then we also create our own technology tools as well. So we're launching a new product called Beam Transfer, which is a high-speed, globally accessible file transfer service that's actually built on top of the Storj network, and it's one of the things we're going to talk about today.
So maybe I can just tee up a little bit of more detail about distributed tech and how it's relevant to the M&E industry. So at Storj, we provide object storage that instead of building data centers that are carbon intensive, buying servers, racking hard drives, and exposing ourselves to all sorts of supply chain risk, what we do is we find excess capacity in data centers all around the world. We aggregate that capacity, and then we distribute storage workloads across tens of thousands of data centers in 100 or more countries. And what that gives us is really a very streamlined approach to low cost, low carbon, highly performant object storage. And so when we talk about distributed tech, we're talking about taking resources all around the world and distributing workloads across them so that you can parallelize transfers and get these great characteristics. And so as a sort of just technology platform provider with the two partners here, I want to start it off, and maybe we can talk a little bit about how the distributed part of that technology is helping you build things that are transforming your industry. So maybe Jordan, I'll have you start this time.
Sure. Absolutely. So, on the Shadow Magic side, we use, we basically took the whole process of the digital lab and we moved it to the point of capture. So this usually happens with a product that we call the Magic Box, where we ship a fully featured digital lab computer system. And it lives at the production office. PA comes, drops off a shuttle drives, leaves it completely unattended. And then we process all the dailies from there and then do an instant, cloud archive. And part of the problem that we were having, early on was simply, even within the United States, things like you set up a cloud region in US East, you get very good performance. They go to do a pickup shoot in Los Angeles. Suddenly the performance is terrible. Now, because you're pulling all the information and uploading all the information halfway, all the way across the country. And then in addition to that, you now have to manage multiple regions, but have potentially even replicating data across multiple regions in order to get, your archive accessible, everywhere in the world, which, so lots of costs, lots of complexity and management. And this was fundamentally solved by using the Storj network. One of the things that's, pretty profound about Storj as an endpoint is that it's almost like a platform in and of itself. Every file that goes into Storj is sharded and distributed all across the world. So essentially that file becomes local everywhere. So whatever application you put on top of it also becomes global. So if you use an asset management solution like Iconic or something like that, all of the uploads, the downloads, the transfers, and the accessibility to those files suddenly becomes as if you were local anywhere in the world, and with high speed and consistent speed, anywhere in the world. Taking that as sort of a revelation, we decided to build our own, file transfer, solution, which is this new product called Beam Transfer. And just by virtue of using the Storj endpoint, we were able to achieve bidirectional 10 gig speeds everywhere in the world. And that's 1.17, 1.18 gigabytes per second, like maxing out a 10 gig line. And the only reason why we're not saying higher numbers is we literally just don't have a faster testing environment. But the only limitation in terms of speed, because Storj can take massive amounts of parallelism. So we can throw 600, 1200 connections at it, no problem. And basically you're just limited at that point to the system resources. So using Storj as a foundational layer for media workflows and also to build applications on top of has a really profound impact. And then if all that wasn't cool enough, it's 40% cheaper than the nearest competition.
So Eric, your platform is also built on distributed tech, and you're sort of using other distributed technologies with it. So how is that impacting both kind of what you do and the service you take to market?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, a little bit of background. LivePeer is actually built in a very similar, technical approach as Storj. But what we focus on is video processing and video streaming, right? So, as we, kind of take the same approach, our system is also very much distributed around the world in different data centers around the world, many different countries. When people are trying to process their video, say if they're trying to transcode it, it's always going to the closest data centers, using GPUs, transcoding it, and returning it back to them. Or if somebody's trying to watch a video, they're viewing it from the closest node to them. Now, if we combine this, processing and streaming solution with a traditional storage provider, then we would run into the problem of everything else on top is distributed and, work in this global way. But when it comes to the storage, it's limited with one region. And that kind of defeats the whole purpose of having, everything to be distributed. So having, Storj as a distributed storage layer help us kind of fulfill that vision to be able to not only do live streaming in a distributed manner, but also be able to do video on demand in a distributed manner, which is really important for our users, because a lot of times they're doing live streaming and VOD at the same time.
So thinking about how these things are impacting trends in the industry, in a post-COVID world where sort of remote work became the norm, it sort of opened up, I think, a lot of eyes in terms of like, hey, this isn't just a adaptation to a temporary situation. It's actually an advantage more broadly. In terms of distributed workflow for teams that are now operating not just sort of out of convenience, but out of strategic importance globally, how are these distributed technologies impacting what you're seeing in the market in terms of like how teams have adapted and now finding a more advantageous workflow?
Yeah, I think, film production has always had a global reach. And I think a lot of the tools were there. When COVID happened, there was kind of a flashpoint of like, well, we need a solution, right now. And so adopting some of these more, how would you say, global or remote, solutions, became less scary because almost out of necessity. But it's not uncommon for like, even on an independent film that's, let's just say $5 million, it's not uncommon to shoot in one location, edit in another location, potentially have a assistant editor even now in another location, have finishing in another location, and then maybe VFX happen in 3 different countries. All sort of, chasing the bottom line. And film production, the industry definitely, the economics of especially independent filmmaking, but filmmaking in general has definitely shifted over the last 5 years. We're trying to, get out of what would be, sort of traditional hubs like New York and California a lot of times, and we're chasing wherever the tax credits are. It's almost impossible to get a film financer off the ground without some sort of credit or incentive. So by definition, the film industry is going remote. That is to say, we're going to a location where the rest of the team isn't, and then having access to new, how would you say, like the amount of global talent that is around that we now have access to, and seamlessly integrate. There's no barrier in terms of location anymore. It's not like, oh, well, Los Angeles has the best, how would you say, aggregate of post-production talent. So we have to be there so that we can take advantage of all of it. It's like, that's not a consideration anymore. It's very, very common, for all this stuff to be global. So that's even on the independent film side where you'd think, well, they don't have the budget to do that. Well, yeah, they do, because of these amazing new technologies, from Storj, these sort of like implementations of those technologies from, other sort of progressive companies like ours that are trying to take advantage of these new normals and be sort of technically creative in how we can keep putting money on the screen, and allow people to, share their stories and share part of who they are with the world, and, build bridges and all the things that we want to do with storytelling. It's an exciting time, but it's also it's a technically technically creative time, let's say.
And so, Eric, as both a platform provider and a service provider in this space, I mean, are you seeing the same sort of trend following through in workloads on your environments and your teams?
Yeah, I think remote working is definitely here to stay, right? We've actually already been a remote first company for as long as we've been around, but I think COVID has accelerated that in terms of thinking about, from an operational perspective, how do we set up the company, not only in the U.S., but also in regions that are strategic for us to be able to increase the operational efficiency in terms of, even from an employment and pay, and kind of payroll perspective, from a legal perspective, also super important. When it comes to our customer base, a lot of our customers have kind of a global business to start with, right? Because we are a streaming infrastructure provider, and we're powering these streaming platforms around the world. So these platforms all have a global audience around the world. So our service is also by default just global. And yeah, from that perspective, having a global footprint from an infrastructure perspective is, baseline for us.
Yeah. One of the other interesting, artifacts of distributed technologies is they all have, kind of built into them these really strong security and privacy controls, using really strong encryption to make sure that the data, when it's distributed, is also protected, private, and secure. In terms of the kind of evolution of workloads, I think there's probably a couple of different ways where privacy and security come in, whether it's people having concern about their data, the accuracy or integrity of their data, or concerns around being deplatformed. How are you seeing these sort of, privacy and security attributes of just distributed technologies impacting customers and providing value in the solutions that are getting built?
Well, I almost want to turn the mic back over to you, because this is also this is a huge, hugely important area. And one of the reasons why we and all of our customers have, very quickly adopted Storj is architecturally, before you even get to the stuff on the service, architecturally, the security is pretty next generation. Do you want to maybe tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can sort of give a high level here. So, the way data is stored on our service is, instead of storing replicas and full copies in an individual data centers, what we do is we actually encrypt it with keys our customers manage that we don't have, for sort of this maximum level of privacy up front. And then once it's encrypted, it's erasure encoded. And erasure encoding is something that's probably really familiar to everybody at this conference, but basically what it does is it breaks something up into really tiny pieces where there's redundancy built in. So if you have 60 pieces of something, you only need 29, any 29 of the pieces to get it back. And then those pieces are distributed over tens of thousands of endpoints. And so, what we've built in is just this really interesting kit around the security and access management for those tools, so that you can really provide granular control over who has access to what down to the PAT prefix level. So individual objects. And then we've made a bunch of tooling and worked with partners to make that useful in terms of how object storage platforms, or now even file storage platforms, can interact with that capability.
And, that's, I just think that's really cool. But the practical implications of this are really quite profound, because the way the Storj network works, data centers can go down, can lose power, you can lose access. If you're in a fast turnaround media environment, that could be catastrophic. Even if it goes down for a few hours. The way the Storj network works is actually an entire state can go down, even an entire country could go down, and you'll never lose availability. You just pull from the next closest nodes in the network. So besides having, global speed and global performance, there's also next level availability and security. And as you mentioned, this is an absolutely critical point in the film industry where a data breach can be, catastrophic to not just the production, but entire studios. You really don't have time to waste 2 hours when you're at the 2-yard line on a media project.
Yeah, Eric, in terms of especially on the sort of the privacy side and the deplatforming side and sort of the importance of security and privacy to customers, what are the trends that you're seeing with your users and your customers, and how is this evolving?
Yeah, I think there's generally in the industry a trend around anti-big tech. Right, just in general, in the media in general, right? People are thinking, oh, okay, there's now even a trend of big tech versus small tech, right? Where, if you look at the A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz investment thesis, it's all about supporting small tech companies because the big tech companies are getting a little too powerful and they're kind of abusing their power, in ways that are anti-consumer, right? So, we mostly work with emerging companies that are competing with some of the big players out there. So we definitely see a lot of that sentiment within our customer base that people want to find newer solutions. They also want to find an infrastructure provider that's not also owned by their competitor, right? Which is oftentimes the case, if you're using any of these big cloud providers. So I think a lot of that just from almost like foundational motivation perspective, people are looking for an alternative solution. I think that having a better security model in general is really interesting because if you look at today's cloud providers, the traditional ones, the security model is pretty legacy, right? It's built up over years and years and going back to 20 years ago, right? When you have security groups and you need to configure your network partitions, all these things. They're very complex. It's really error prone. And if you don't have a trained architect that has multiple years of experience that helps you really configure your security, you're probably getting it wrong somewhere, right? And that's a huge problem. So a part of it is just, okay, how do we actually simplify the security requirement and the requirement of security knowledge for people who aren't necessarily security experts? They're maybe running a streaming platform. They really care about their customers. They want to focus their efforts there. So I think, the Storj solution, is a really good one in terms of just the simplicity of it.
Yeah. And that's a good point where, the distributed architectures are really the first net new alternative to the architecture that was established by Amazon for cloud services in 2008, right? You build a building, you rack a bunch of servers, you fill them full of hard drives, you plug in the internet, and that's cloud. And this is really a different approach. You don't build any data centers, you don't rack any servers, you find existing resources and you utilize hard drives that might be 10% full. You make them 75% full. You use GPUs that are idle, that aren't running workloads, and you make them, much more useful. And that architecture though, even though it's novel, it's different. It's like, ooh, that's different. That sounds like a lot of work. Your simplicity idea there, maybe just talk a little bit about the importance of when you're introducing new technologies or bringing new things to market, the compatibility and the ease of user experience and sort of abstracting out the complexity to make it valuable.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I think, so right now, we have these, there's, the cloud infrastructure and the cloud industry is already pretty established where there's lots of layers of service providers, right? When you're using a cloud provider, you're almost never using it in kind of the bare, in like the most bottom layer anymore. You're always using service providers that are built on top of these cloud providers that are already doing the complex configuration for you. And then they provide an easier interface. And then maybe you're even working with service providers that are built on top of other service providers that further simplify the ease of use, right? So, you have these layers built out and that's all great. And, so I think from a go-to-market perspective as new service providers, we always aim to provide the easiest solution, right? So compatible with the, kind of the easiest option out there. In our case, when we work with Storj, our customers don't even need to know that they're using Storj under the hood. Like we tell them, hey, we're using Storj under the hood and, you get good cost benefits, which is like, 60%, 70% less than other providers and they're always happy about saving that much money. But they're also really happy that, I can just do a migration within a couple weeks of work instead of having to, like, if I have to move from AWS to GCP, that's like a 4 to 6 month engineering build, right? Like, and just the amount of lift is so different. And I think the cost savings is another thing that's really important. Cost saving from a manpower perspective, cost savings from a pure infrastructure perspective, because you're not actually leveraging all these different layers of services that all trying to take a piece of the pie, right? They're all taking a cut. So that, this is how we get to today's world where things are just so expensive. So I think by removing all that complexity, having just one solution that offers the entire stack that's really transparent, that also just provides simplicity from day one, is how I think about it.
And the net effect of that is it has this kind of, it just works feeling, right? It's like, I sometimes explain Storj or distributed computing and like, it works the way a layman thinks of the cloud, whereas like you upload it to the ether of the everywhere place and it just kind of everywhere. But the truth of the matter is that's actually not how the legacy, cloud storage has ever worked. It's not how the hyperscalers work. Your data exists on a hard drive in a data center. And, if you pull out that drive, you actually have the file. And the farther away you get away from it, you can't change the speed of light, no matter how hard we try. You're going to have decreases in performance and you're going to have to replicate, which is going to add into cost, which is going to add into management, which is going to need expertise to even understand this in the first place. I mean, we're talking about simplicity right now. One of the things that I think is pretty profound about what we did with Shadow Magic is, we're filmmakers. We don't have an IT department, right? We want to make movies. We want to support independent films. We believe independent films are where culture is made. And we love I had all the, opportunities to be a career assistant editor on Marvel movies. And what I really wanted to do was the guy who was going to mortgage his house to make his passion project. It's like, that's where my heart is. And I think, it's really cool that there's a democratization of technology. It's really cool that a lot of people get to share their voices. It's like, these are the things I care about. I don't want to be, I like the technology, don't get me wrong, but I don't want to be sitting around thinking about object storage all day. Like, I just want it to work. And I think that one of the things that was particularly empowering for me in partnering with Storj, both on Beam Transfer and with Shadow Magic, is that it achieved that level of simplicity. No matter what application we put on top of it, or if we were developing our own and using it as a foundational layer, it just worked in the way you would think it would work. And now we have, all the speed we would want anywhere in the world. And I don't have to think about localities. I'm not thinking about data centers. I'm not thinking about complex integrations. Simplicity. It just works.
Yeah. And along those lines, one of the things that we've heard consistently from the people building on our services, hey, they also wanted to have just a simple file mount. Right? I just want to mount this thing as a drive so I can do video editing workflows. I want something that's really fast that works with any S3 backend. And so one of the things that at Storj that we did is we actually acquired a company. So we acquired a company called Petagene, and Petagene makes this product called QNOFS. And it is the dead simplest way to interact with object storage. If you're a video editor, you can simply install it, map a drive to a bucket, and then interact with object storage just like it is on your desktop. And it's fast. It works with Storj. It works with Amazon. It works with Google, any S3 backend. But the cool thing is it works best with Storj. And so we're really excited about that in terms of things that add a layer of just dead simple ways to interact with cloud use cases, without that huge tax. And maybe just, well,
it takes something that's sort of technical and abstract and turns it into something practical, right? Like not everyone even knows what S3 is. Not everyone even understands that, especially from a media point of view. We think in files. We don't think in objects, right? We need to be able to work with that media file whenever we need it immediately. And those are the things that we care about. So yeah, solutions like that will provide, easy access to various, applications and creatives. And that's very exciting.
One of the other interesting things, just sort of tangentially on the distributed tech side, is the cost ends up being significantly lower because you're not building buildings and you're not hiring security guards to secure the buildings and all of those weird costs that sort of trickle down into that market. And we're starting to see like cost is not just like ooh, I'm saving money, but it's actually become strategic, and it's becoming in some cases the difference in having a business model and not having a business model. And maybe Eric, I can start with you and like, how is this working out for you? I know we have some joint customers together who cost has been incredibly material.
Yeah, for sure. Like, just give you an example. There's a nonprofit organization called God Behind Bars, right? They stream church content to over 1 million inmates in the U.S. It's a nonprofit organization. They have a huge footprint of audience, and streaming is very expensive. There's no way that they could have the level of impact that they can have having built on cloud, like on traditional cloud infrastructure, right? So we actually just enable that impact to exist in the world. That's one of my favorite examples, because it's not just about business and making money. It's really about like they're actually creating an impact in the world that they really are passionate about. The other thing that we're starting to see is, the rise of AI, right? And we all know that's, reshaping our industry, and what people don't really think about today, well, maybe they're starting to think about, but don't really grasp the full, gravity of that, is there's a huge amount of cost when it comes to running AI, anything, especially when you try to run AI in the cloud. Really, really expensive. GPUs are expensive. They're marked up really high in traditional cloud providers. The usage of, the utilization rate is not high. The models are really heavy. Like, all these problems are not being solved fast enough. We're working on some AI solutions in the video streaming space. And I know Storj also has a AI kind of adjacent business around GPUs with Valdi. I think this type of lesson of saving costs when it comes to this new wave of technology is going to be really, really important to make sure that it's actually accessible to everybody and not just to like the huge companies. And we all just are kind of like watching people do cool things.
And Jordan, as a person who runs a filmmaking business, I think you looked at the cost of a lot of the existing file transfer services, and you decided to actually go and build Beam. Can you kind of talk a little bit about your motivation there and how you expect the impact to be?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's no movie or media project in the world that doesn't have to send files very fast to lots of different places. And the sort of legacy equipment or solutions that are in this space are very expensive. And they require things like figuring out where you are and uploading to the nearest edge node, and then initiating a cloud to cloud transfer to another edge node, and then activating file transfer acceleration, and then down. I mean, the amount of orchestration that it takes just to even conceive of that idea is pretty huge. But with Storj, we were able to basically use the distributed network as our foundational infrastructure, and then get very, very simple, easy to use, solutions to media professionals to move massive files. And because we're also not just the performance, but because we're on top of Storj, we might be almost the only file transfer service that actually incentivizes you to keep things in the cloud. Because the storage is so inexpensive. So you can use it as a turnkey camera to cloud solution. You just take, all the material comes out of the camera, uploads into a central location, and then can send off to visual effects or whatever down the line. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so I think we're at the end of our time here. So Eric, Jordan, thank you very much. Hope this was an interesting session for you about distributed technology.